Hello, horror stories. Greetings, James from North Dakota. I have decided to share with you my paranormal experience. You can believe me or not, but I swear on my deceased mother that this was real, and to this day I can't get over it. Over 8 years ago, I was working as a cab driver, taking turns between day and night in order to cover the cost of my wife's pregnancy and the baby's arrival. We were going to be first-time parents, which I was very excited about, as I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed to make sure she had everything she needed. I especially remember one night when I was working, the weather was very bad, colder than usual due to a torrential storm. It was after 10 p.m., and I was still driving my cab almost at the end of my shift. I had taken a couple to the airport, and after dropping them off, I remained parked, waiting to see if I could pick up anyone else from there and take advantage of the ride back. Seeing that no one required my services as there were no flights, I decided after a while to turn around and head home. Weather was really bad, and it was raining heavily. Besides, my wife had already called me worried, asking me to come back soon. I was driving home very carefully as the rain was coming down so heavily that I could barely see through the cab's windshield. Suddenly, I saw a lady standing under a roof, motioning for me to stop, even though I was no longer on duty. I felt great remorse for not slowing down and leaving her alone in the rain at that time of night. So I decided to stop and let her get into the cab. I remember that she sat in the back seat on the driver's side, which made it difficult to see her clearly through the rearview mirror. I noticed that she was wearing a veil covering her face, which I thought was a little strange, but I didn't think anything of it. I asked her where she needed a ride, but she didn't respond. I insisted after a few minutes, asking her, "Ma'am, where are you going? Where do you need me to take you?" Suddenly, in a chilling whisper, she replied, "To your house." Something I did not expect to hear. I froze as I heard those words because I knew it wasn't a joke. Instinctively, I turned to look at her, but when I turned to the back seat, the lady was no longer there. Incredulous, I turned around again, but there was still no sign of the woman. Panic began to invade me. How was it possible that she had disappeared with the car running without me noticing? I could not understand it. I accelerated rapidly. My heart was pounding and a cold sweat was breaking out on my back. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I drove as fast as I could towards home, wanting to get there soon and leave that terrifying feeling behind. The rain was still pounding hard on the windshield, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get there. As I drove on, I kept looking at the rearview mirror over and over again. I was in a state of total paranoia. I finally arrived home and parked the car in the garage, as usual. I got out and opened the back door to clean up the vehicle a bit and get it ready for the next day. When I opened the door, the first thing I found shocked me on the back seat. There was a chain. It wasn't just any chain. It was the same one we had buried my mother with less than 8 months ago. My hands began to tremble as I took the chain and examined it carefully. There was no doubt it was the same chain we had placed on my mother's coffin. On the back, delicately engraved, were the initials of her father, my grandfather. Confirming what I had feared, I could not contain myself and broke down in tears. My wife came out very frightened when she heard me arrive for Gerikenner. But noticing that I did not enter the house, she came to look for me in the garage. Seeing me in that state, with my eyes full of tears, she asked me what was going on. Her gaze stopped on my hands where I was holding the chain that she also knew very well. It was she who on the day of the funeral had placed that chain, belonging to my grandfather, around my mother's neck. My grandfather had been ill for months, bedridden with a terminal illness. Aware that he had little time left, he always told me that he wanted me, his only grandson, to keep that chain as a reminder of him. Knowing that the chain had now returned to my hands in this way had left me in complete shock. At that moment, I realized that the person who had gotten into my cab was none other than my mother, sent to leave me my grandfather's chain. My wife looked at me with concern, and I, between sobs, told her what had happened. I told her how I had picked up the lady in the rain and how she had disappeared in a matter of minutes without explanation from the top of the cab, and that when I got home, I found the chain in the back seat. My wife listened silently, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear. That night I couldn't sleep. I was pretty sure it was my mother who got into my cab just to give me that chain. If you are enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe. We continue. My name is Robert, and I want to share another paranormal experience I had while working as a taxi driver a few years ago in San Antonio, United States. It happened on a Tuesday, a date I remember clearly because it was usually my day off. However, since I had been sick a few days earlier, I decided to work that day to avoid losing more shifts. I was driving on Route 10 when the clock struck 9 p.m. I still had a couple of hours left to finish my shift. That night, my life took a complete turn at a traffic light. Suddenly, a woman around 50 years old, dressed completely in white, got into the taxi without warning. Her sudden appearance surprised me so much that I was scared. It seemed like she had emerged out of nowhere, and without saying a word, she was already sitting in the back seat of my taxi. Although I was a bit annoyed by her behavior, I understood that encountering all kinds of people was part of my job. I greeted her and asked where she was heading. Without uttering a single word, she handed me an old, crumpled piece of paper with the address I needed to take her to. With a palpable sense of discomfort in the air, I drove the taxi to the address indicated on the paper that the mysterious woman had given me. During the journey, I tried to engage in conversation to break the tense silence, but the woman remained completely silent. As I drove, I noticed in the rearview mirror that the woman was staring at me intently. Her penetrating gaze made me feel uncomfortable, as if she couldn't take her eyes off me. I asked her if she was okay, but her face showed a strange expression, with red eyes as if she had been crying for days. She only mentioned the hurry to get home, where her husband and daughter were waiting for her. I decided to accelerate to get there faster, aware of her urgency and that something was not right. After about 20 minutes, when I arrived at the address indicated by the GPS, I thought I was lost. I found myself in a wasteland where there was absolutely nothing and no one in sight. The scene was desolate, with only debris visible in the distance. I stopped and checked the address again on the GPS to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. However, I confirmed that it was the same location provided by the woman. So I asked him if the address was correct, because I didn't see anything there. After a few seconds, she responded, "Yes, this is it. Thank you." The woman's response only added to my confusion. How could this place be his destiny? Despite my skepticism, I decided to trust her word and left her in the middle of the desolate street. As she walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear, as if I were leaving something unknown and dangerous behind. When I turned the car to return, I lost sight of her and was perplexed. I couldn't understand how I had ended up there. The idea of leaving a woman alone in a vacant lot disturbed me deeply. A feeling of guilt took over me. So I decided to stop the car, get out, and start honking and yelling if I needed help. I grabbed my phone and used it to illuminate the wasteland, searching for any sign of her. I spent some time exploring, looking for clues, but I never saw her again. As I drove home, confusion and fear took over me. When I arrived, while waiting for water to boil for tea, I decided to Google the address where I had taken that mysterious woman, unable to bear the uncertainty and looking for an explanation for this incident. To my surprise, the search revealed a terrifying story that occurred about 20 years ago. The house at that same address had caught fire due to a gas leak, and most chilling of all, trapped inside were a man and a child. With my heart racing, I inquired more about the tragedy. I saw a photo of a survivor of that accident. A woman, the same one I had transported in my taxi that night. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that I had left the wife and mother of these victims in a place marked by suffering and loss. However, upon further investigation, I discovered that the woman was not in the house. She was working when the tragedy occurred, and upon receiving the call with the terrible news, she took her own life that same day. The revelation that the woman had taken her own life upon hearing of the tragedy added a new level of distress, and, to be honest, I was in shock. Everything began to click in my mind. That unfortunate woman desperately wanted to be reunited with her family. However, the idea of having had contact with someone who is no longer with us was difficult for me to believe. I understood that there are connections that transcend death and that there are souls that seek peace in the midst of suffering. But to be honest, to this day this story bothers me and will continue to bother me forever. If you liked the story, Please click like, just to see if you enjoyed it or maybe to let me know if you've had similar experiences. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.